The sky above New Geneva burned orange as the alien ships descended like metallic vultures. Commander Jake Harrison crouched behind the twisted remains of what used to be the city's main defense tower and watched his world die. The crystal beings called Vorthak had arrived first, their ships looking like floating diamonds that hurt to look at directly. Behind them came the insect ships of the Zephyrians, moving in perfect formation like a deadly swarm. Last were the energy beings known as the Luminal Collective, their vessels glowing white-hot against the darkening sky. 3 months ago, these same aliens had come to Earth speaking of peace and galactic integration. They had promised humanity a place among the stars, advanced technology, and an end to war and suffering. The world leaders had welcomed them with open arms, eager to join what the aliens called the galactic community. Jake had been suspicious from the start, but his warnings fell on deaf ears. Politicians saw opportunity where soldiers saw threat. The first sign of trouble came when the aliens requested detailed biological scans of every human on Earth. They claimed it was for medical compatibility, to ensure humans could survive on other worlds. Dr. Lisa Martinez, the lead scientist working with the aliens, had expressed concerns about the invasive nature of the scans, but the government pushed forward anyway. The promise of immortality and enhanced abilities was too tempting to resist. Jake remembered the day everything changed. He had been in a meeting with the alien representatives when his communicator buzzed with an emergency alert. Reports were coming in from around the globe of humans suddenly collapsing, their minds seemingly switched off like machines. The aliens in the room had shown no surprise, no concern, only a cold satisfaction that made Jake's blood run cold. Neural control collars appeared within hours, sleek metal bands that locked around human necks and could not be removed. The aliens explained that the collars were temporary, necessary for the integration process. They would help humans adapt to galactic society by suppressing their chaotic emotional responses and violent tendencies. What they really did was turn people into mindless slaves. Jake had managed to escape the initial roundup along with a few thousand other humans scattered across the globe. Now, 3 months later, he was leading the last organized resistance on Earth. His forces were down to less than 200 people, armed with primitive weapons against technology that seemed like magic. Every day brought new horrors as he watched his people either captured or killed. The aliens had divided Earth into 3 zones of control. The Vorthak took Europe and Asia, turning humans into living batteries to power their crystal technology. The Zephyrians claimed Africa and South America, using humans as components in their hive mind experiments. The Luminal Collective took North America, studying human consciousness in ways that left their subjects as empty shells. From his hiding spot, Jake could see the processing center where captured humans were fitted with the neural collars. Men, women, and children stood in perfect lines, their eyes blank and staring. The collars glowed softly around their necks, pulsing in rhythm with some alien signal that had replaced their free will. Guards moved among them, not alien guards but humans wearing the same collars, their faces empty of everything that had once made them human. Dr. Lisa Martinez worked frantically in her hidden laboratory beneath the ruins of the Geneva Science Center. She had been studying the neural collars for weeks, trying to understand how they worked and, more importantly, how to break them. The technology was unlike anything she had ever seen, operating on principles that seemed to violate basic physics. The collars didn't just control behavior, they seemed to reach into the very essence of what made someone human and shut it off. Her research had revealed something even more disturbing. The 3 alien species had been bitter enemies for thousands of years, fighting wars that had destroyed entire star systems. Yet they had put aside their hatred to work together for one purpose: enslaving humanity. The question that haunted her was why. What made humans so special that it could unite 3 species that had been trying to destroy each other for millennia? The answer lay in the alien databases she had managed to hack before going into hiding. Deep in their historical records were references to an ancient species known only as the Destroyers. The records were fragmented and heavily encrypted, but what she could read filled her with both hope and terror. The Destroyers had once ruled the galaxy, possessing abilities that made them nearly godlike in power. They had vanished suddenly, leaving behind only ruins and warnings about their return. Every description of the destroyers matched humanity perfectly. The emotional volatility, the unpredictable behavior, the ability to adapt and evolve in ways that defied logic. Most terrifying of all were the brain scans. The neural patterns that the aliens had taken from humans were identical to the ones in the ancient records of the destroyers. Captain Ryan Brooks crouched in the snow outside his hidden base in the Alaskan wilderness and listened to the emergency transmission crackling through his radio. Another resistance cell had been discovered and destroyed. The survivors taken to the processing centers for collar implantation. His own group numbered just 43 people, including 5 children whose parents had died in the fighting. The cold was brutal, but it provided cover from the alien sensors. The Vorthak thermal detectors couldn't penetrate the natural interference caused by the aurora, and the Zephyrian scouts avoided the harsh weather. Only the luminal energy beings could function effectively in the cold, but they seemed to consider the frozen wasteland beneath their notice. Ryan had been a small-town police chief before the invasion. His experience with crowd control and crisis management had kept his people alive when larger, better-equipped groups had fallen. He understood that survival wasn't about having the best weapons or the most soldiers. It was about being unpredictable, about doing things the enemy didn't expect. The transmission ended with the familiar sound of weapons fire and screaming. Another group of free humans had been eliminated, their location betrayed by someone wearing a neural collar. The collared humans weren't just slaves, they were unwitting spies, their senses linked to alien networks that monitored everything they saw and heard. Jake knew his time was running out. The aliens were closing in, their search patterns becoming more sophisticated with each passing day. Soon they would find his position, and the last organized resistance on Earth would be crushed. But something Dr. Martinez had told him gave him hope. The aliens weren't just conquering humanity out of greed or expansionist ambition. They were afraid. The neural collars weren't just control devices. They were suppressors, designed to keep something locked away inside human minds. Something that had once made humanity the most feared species in the galaxy. The aliens remembered, even if humans had forgotten. They had found Earth not to exploit a primitive species, but to chain a sleeping giant before it could wake up. As the alien ships moved closer to his position, Jake smiled grimly. The aliens thought they had won, that humanity was broken and defeated. They had no idea that every human they enslaved, every collar they placed, every act of cruelty they committed, was awakening something that had been dormant for thousands of years. The destroyers were coming back, and this time they would not choose to disappear. 5 years had passed since the chains were locked around humanity's neck. Paul Carter knelt in the crystal mines of Zerion Prime, his hands bleeding from another day of digging through razor-sharp formations that powered the Vorthak civilization. The neural collar around his neck hummed softly, keeping most of his thoughts locked away. But something was different today. Something was changing. The other human slaves worked in silence around him, their minds trapped behind the alien technology that had stolen their free will. Paul remembered being an engineer before the invasion, designing fusion reactors and quantum computers that had once seemed like the height of human achievement. Now he was just another body in the mines, another source of labor for beings who saw humans as useful tools and nothing more. But Paul was starting to remember things the collar was supposed to make him forget. Technical knowledge was seeping back into his consciousness like water through cracks in a dam. When he touched the crystal formations, he could feel electricity flowing through them, patterns of energy that reminded him of the circuit designs he had once created. The Vorthak guards didn't notice when he spent too long examining the crystals, their crystalline minds unable to understand the curiosity that drove organic beings. On the hive world of Chitter, Amy Johnson scrubbed the floors of a Zephyrian breeding chamber while her mind worked on problems the insects could never imagine. She had been a military strategist before the invasion, trained to think 3 steps ahead of any enemy. The neural collar dulled her thoughts but couldn't completely eliminate the patterns of thinking that had made her one of the best tactical minds in the human military. The Zephyrians were insects that thought and acted as one massive organism. Individual Zephyrians had no independent thoughts, no personal desires, no ability to act outside the will of the collective. This made them powerful in some ways, able to coordinate millions of workers and soldiers with perfect efficiency. But it also made them blind to the possibilities of independent action. Amy had begun leaving small marks on the walls as she cleaned, scratches and stains that looked like accidents, but actually formed a code she had developed years ago. Other human slaves began to notice the marks, and something deep in their suppressed minds recognized the pattern. Even with their thoughts clouded by the collars, they understood that someone was trying to communicate. Dr. Lisa Martinez floated in a containment cell aboard a luminal research station, her body surrounded by fields of pure energy that the luminal collective used to study human consciousness. The energy beings were fascinated by organic thought processes, conducting experiments that would have been called torture if done to their own kind. But humans were just laboratory animals to them, interesting specimens to be prodded and examined. The luminal beings existed as patterns of organized energy, able to manipulate matter and space in ways that seemed impossible to creatures bound by physical laws. They had captured Dr. Martinez because her scientific knowledge made her particularly interesting to study. They wanted to understand how organic brains could solve problems that even their advanced energy matrices found difficult. But as they studied her mind, Dr. Martinez was studying them right back. The neural collar prevented her from acting on most of her thoughts, but it couldn't stop her from observing and learning. She watched how the energy beings manipulated quantum fields, how they processed information, how they stored and retrieved data from their collective memory. Slowly, she began to understand their technology better than they understood her. Back on Earth, Captain Ryan Brooks led his small group of survivors through the ruins of what had once been Seattle. The city was now a luminal research facility, its buildings transformed into geometric patterns of light and energy that hurt human eyes to look at directly. But Ryan had learned to navigate by sound and touch, keeping his people hidden in the few places the energy beings couldn't easily scan. His group had grown slightly over the years as they rescued humans from processing centers and research facilities. Most of the rescued people never recovered from their time in the collars, their minds too damaged to function normally. But a few showed signs of the same changes Ryan was beginning to see in himself and his core team. They were faster than they used to be, more aware of their surroundings, able to predict danger before it appeared. The neural collars weren't just suppressing human thoughts, Ryan realized. They were suppressing something else, something that the aliens desperately wanted to keep locked away. He had found fragments of alien transmissions that spoke of containment protocols and suppression fields, technical terms that didn't make sense unless the aliens were trying to prevent something specific from happening to their human prisoners. Paul Carter was deep in the crystal mines when it happened. His hand touched a particularly large formation, and suddenly he could feel the entire power grid of Zerion Prime flowing through his consciousness. The sensation was overwhelming, like trying to drink from a waterfall, but somehow his mind adapted to handle the massive flow of information. He could see how the crystals were connected, how energy moved through them, how the Vorthak used them to power their cities and ships. Without thinking about it, Paul began to adjust the flow patterns. He redirected power from non-essential systems, rerouted energy through more efficient pathways, eliminated wasteful loops that the Vorthak had never bothered to optimize. The changes were small at first, barely noticeable improvements that the crystalline beings attributed to natural variation in their power systems. Amy Johnson had managed to make contact with 12 other human slaves in her section of the hive complex. Using her wall markings and carefully timed movements, she had taught them a simple communication system that bypassed their neural collars. The insects monitoring them saw only routine cleaning and maintenance work, unable to comprehend that the chaotic individual actions of the humans were actually coordinated group behavior. The breakthrough came when Amy realized that the Zephyrians' collective consciousness was also their greatest weakness. They couldn't understand independent thinking because they had never experienced it themselves. Every Zephyrian action was predictable because it was part of a larger pattern, a hive mind that prioritized efficiency over adaptability. But humans were naturally chaotic, naturally unpredictable, naturally individual. Amy began teaching her small group to think like individuals again. She couldn't remove their neural collars, but she could help them remember what it felt like to make personal choices, to act on individual impulses, to think thoughts that belonged to no one else. It was dangerous work because any unusual behavior might alert the Zephyrian monitors. But Amy had learned to hide rebellion inside routine. Dr. Martinez felt the change beginning deep in her mind as the luminal beings conducted another painful experiment on her consciousness. They were trying to map her thought processes to understand how organic brains could generate original ideas. But as they probed her mind with their energy fields, something unexpected was happening. Instead of just being studied, she was beginning to study them right back. The quantum fields the luminal beings used to examine her thoughts were starting to feel familiar, like mathematical equations she could almost solve. Her suppressed memories of advanced physics were returning, enhanced by her direct exposure to technologies that operated on principles human science had barely begun to understand. She was learning to think like an energy being while still retaining her organic humanity. All across the galaxy, similar changes were occurring in other human slaves. The neural collars that were supposed to keep humanity chained were beginning to fail in ways the aliens had never anticipated, not through mechanical breakdown or programming errors, but through the simple fact that human consciousness was more adaptable than their creators had imagined. The three alien species had made a fundamental mistake. They had assumed that suppressing human thoughts would make humans controllable. But consciousness wasn't just thought, it was the capacity to grow and change and become something new, and humans were very, very good at becoming something new when survival demanded it. The chains were still locked around humanity's neck, but the locks were beginning to weaken. Soon the aliens would discover that enslaving humanity had been the worst mistake they could possibly have made. The explosion that rocked Zerion Prime could be felt across 3 star systems. Paul Carter stood in the center of the crystal mine, his hands still touching the massive power node he had just overloaded, and watched as the planet's defensive grid shut down completely. The neural collar around his neck sparked and went dead, its circuits fried by the feedback pulse he had somehow generated through the alien power network. Around him, other human slaves stared in shock as their own collars began failing one by one. The Vorthak guards rushed toward Paul, their crystalline bodies humming with alarm frequencies, but they stopped when they saw what was happening to him. Energy patterns flowed across his skin like living tattoos, and when he looked at them, his eyes glowed with the same blue light that powered their technology. Paul didn't understand what was happening to him, but he knew it felt right. The alien technology wasn't foreign anymore. It was part of him. He could sense every power conduit in the mining complex, every data stream flowing through the crystal network. With a thought, he redirected energy flows and shut down the guard stations throughout the facility. The Vorthak beings collapsed as their life support systems failed, their crystalline forms going dark like burned-out light bulbs. News of the Zerion Prime incident spread through hidden human networks faster than the aliens could contain it. On Chitter, Amy Johnson received the coded message through scratches on her cleaning equipment that had been arranged by other human slaves working in the communication centers. The message was simple but revolutionary. The collars could be broken and humans were fighting back. Amy had been waiting for this moment. Over the past month, she had built a network of 12 humans who could communicate despite their neural suppression. Now she put her plan into action. During the next shift change, when Zephyrian attention was focused on coordinating the hive activities, Amy and her team struck at 17 different locations simultaneously. The beauty of her plan was its chaos. The Zephyrians couldn't predict or counter individual actions because their collective mind had never experienced true independence. While they tried to coordinate a response to the attack on the power generators, Amy's team was already hitting the communication nodes. While they rushed to protect the communication system, her people were sabotaging the life support systems. Each human acted alone, making individual decisions that the hive mind couldn't anticipate. The Zephyrians found themselves fighting an enemy that didn't follow any logical pattern, whose actions seemed random but were actually part of a larger strategy they couldn't comprehend. Within 6 hours, Amy's small group had taken control of an entire hive complex, and her neural collar had burned out from the strain of coordinating so many independent actions simultaneously. Dr. Lisa Martinez felt the change beginning in her. cell aboard the luminal research station. The energy beings had been experimenting on her for days, trying to understand how her consciousness worked, but something was going wrong with their tests. Instead of her mind being absorbed into their energy matrix, their energy was being absorbed into her consciousness. The quantum fields they used to probe her thoughts were becoming part of her thought processes. She could feel herself expanding beyond the boundaries of her physical body, her awareness spreading through the station's energy systems. The mathematical principles that governed luminal technology were making sense to her in ways that should have been impossible for an organic mind. When the luminal beings realized what was happening, they tried to shut down the experiment. But Dr. Martinez had already learned too much. She reached out with her enhanced consciousness and took control of the probability fields that kept the station functioning. With a thought that was more mathematics than words, she rearranged the quantum structures that maintained the energy beings' forms. The luminal collective screamed in frequencies that human ears couldn't hear as their carefully organized energy patterns were scattered across space. Dr. Martinez walked out of her cell, her body glowing with absorbed energy, stepping through walls that were no longer solid to her enhanced perception. She had become something new, something that could exist in both the physical and energy dimensions simultaneously. On Earth, Captain Ryan Brooks felt the change coming like electricity in the air before a thunderstorm. His small group of survivors had grown to nearly 200 people, and all of them were showing signs of the same evolution he had noticed in himself. They moved faster than normal humans, reacted to dangers before they appeared, and seemed to instinctively understand alien technology they had never seen before. The breakthrough came when they found one of the collar manufacturing facilities, hidden beneath the ruins of Chicago. The building was heavily guarded by all three alien species working together, which told Ryan that whatever was inside was important to their enemies. His team managed to infiltrate the facility using tactics that none of the alien species could counter effectively. Inside, they found the truth that Dr. Martinez had discovered years earlier. The neural collars weren't just control devices. They were genetic suppressors designed to prevent humans from accessing dormant abilities coded into their DNA. The aliens had found references to these abilities in ancient galactic archives, descriptions of a species that had once ruled the stars through powers that seemed magical to less advanced races. Ryan realized that humanity hadn't always been the primitive species the aliens thought they were conquering. Humans were the descendants of the destroyers, the legendary beings who had vanished from the galaxy thousands of years ago. The neural collars were the aliens' attempt to keep humanity from remembering what they really were. But the suppressors were failing. All across the galaxy, humans were breaking free from their mental chains and rediscovering abilities their species had forgotten. Paul Carter could interface directly with any technology he touched. Amy Johnson could coordinate chaos into victory. Dr. Martinez could manipulate the fundamental forces that held reality together, and there were others, hundreds of others, all awakening to powers that made them more than human. The aliens' desperate messages flowed through intercepted communications as the three species realized their worst nightmare was coming true. The fourth act spoke of humans who could control their crystal networks better than they could. The Zephyrians reported losses to individual humans who fought with impossible unpredictability. The Luminal Collective warned of humans who could manipulate energy itself. Emergency meetings were called between the three species as they struggled to understand what was happening. Their ancient enemies were working together more closely than ever before, united by growing terror at what they had accidentally unleashed. The neural collars that were supposed to make humans controllable had instead forced human evolution to accelerate, pushing the species toward abilities that had been dormant for millennia. Paul Carter stood on the surface of Xerion Prime and watched Forthak ships fleeing the system. He could have destroyed them with a thought, could have overloaded their crystal drives and turned their vessels into expanding clouds of superheated gas. But something deeper than revenge stayed his hand. This wasn't about destroying the aliens. It was about humanity reclaiming what had always been theirs. Amy Johnson led her growing army through Zephyrian space, liberating human slaves and adding them to forces that grew stronger with every victory. Her tactics were no longer just unpredictable. They were impossible. She could coordinate thousands of individual actions into strategies that accomplished objectives the enemy didn't even know they were defending. Dr. Martinez appeared on research stations throughout luminal space, walking through their energy barriers like they were made of air. She didn't come to destroy or conquer. She came to free other humans and show them what they could become. Each rescue operation left the Luminal Collective more terrified of what humanity was evolving into. The galaxy was learning what the ancient archives had tried to warn them about. Humanity wasn't meant to be enslaved or controlled. They were meant to rule, and after years of suppression, the destroyers were finally coming home. Jake Harrison stood on the bridge of what had once been a Vorthak battlecruiser and watched the crystal cities of Xerion Prime burn in the distance. The ship responded to his thoughts now, its alien systems somehow understanding human commands better than they had ever understood their original creators. Around him, his crew of former slaves worked at control stations they had learned to operate through pure instinct, their enhanced minds interfacing with technology that had been designed by beings who thought completely differently than humans. The transformation had been faster than anyone expected. Once the neural collars began failing across the galaxy, humans everywhere started remembering things they had never learned, understanding concepts that should have been beyond their primitive minds. Jake himself had changed from a simple military commander into something that could coordinate fleet movements across multiple star systems while simultaneously analyzing alien weaknesses and planning strategies that his enemies couldn't comprehend. Paul Carter no longer looked entirely human. His body had adapted to interface with Vorthak technology so completely that crystal formations grew from his skin like living circuit boards. He could control entire planetary networks with a touch, redirect energy flows that powered civilizations, and shut down defense systems that had been thought impregnable. The Vorthak had created their technology to be controlled only by crystalline minds like their own. But Paul had become something that was both organic and crystal at the same time. The crystal beings' homeworlds fell one by one as Paul and his growing army of technologically enhanced humans swept through their space. The Vorthak tried to fight back, but their weapons and defenses were useless against enemies who understood their technology better than they did. Paul could turn their own crystal networks against them, using their power grids to destroy their cities and their communication systems, to coordinate attacks on their remaining strongholds. Amy Johnson had become something that military strategists throughout the galaxy would study for centuries to come. Her ability to coordinate chaos had evolved beyond individual tactics to encompass entire civilizations. She could take thousands of independent human fighters and turn them into a force that acted with perfect coordination while maintaining complete unpredictability. The Zephyrian hive worlds couldn't handle her attacks because they were designed to fight organized armies, not swarms of individuals who each acted according to their own initiative while somehow working toward common goals. Amy's forces moved like a natural disaster, impossible to predict or prepare for, sweeping through Zephyrian space and liberating human slaves faster than the insect collective could organize a response. Every victory brought more humans into Amy's growing army, and each new recruit made the force exponentially more powerful. The freed slaves didn't need training or orientation. They instinctively understood their role in the larger strategy. Amy could coordinate millions of fighters without giving a single direct order, her enhanced consciousness somehow communicating tactical information directly to every human under her command. Dr. Karen White had been one of the last humans rescued from the luminal research stations, but her transformation was perhaps the most dramatic of all. Years of exposure to pure energy experiments had changed her into something that existed in both physical and energy dimensions simultaneously. She could absorb luminal beings into herself, adding their knowledge and power to her own growing abilities. The energy-based aliens found themselves facing an impossible enemy. They had thought their energy forms made them superior to physical beings, but Dr. White could manipulate energy more efficiently than they could. She could exist as pure energy when it suited her, or take physical form when she needed to interact with the material world. The luminal collective's greatest strength had become useless against an enemy who had mastered their own abilities and improved upon them. Dr. White moved through luminal space like a living weapon, freeing human prisoners and absorbing any energy, being that tried to stop her. Each absorbed luminal made her more powerful, adding to her understanding of quantum manipulation and energy control. She was becoming something beyond human, beyond alien, something entirely new that combined the best aspects of both organic and energy-based life. The three alien species held emergency conferences as their territories shrank and their populations fled before advancing human forces. Ancient archives were opened, and forbidden technologies were deployed in desperate attempts to stop what they had accidentally created. But every weapon they used against humanity was quickly understood and countered by minds that seemed to adapt faster than the aliens could think. Dr. Lisa Martinez had established herself as the coordinator of human scientific efforts across the galaxy. Her ability to manipulate probability fields let her appear anywhere in known space instantly, bringing rescued human scientists and captured alien technology to hidden research facilities that existed in folded dimensions outside normal space-time. Human science was advancing at an impossible rate, as enhanced minds worked with technologies that had taken the alien species millennia to develop. But humans weren't just copying alien achievements, they were improving on them, finding efficiencies and capabilities that the original designers had never imagined. Every piece of technology that fell into human hands was quickly reverse-engineered, improved, and turned back against its creators. The research facilities Dr. Martinez coordinated were producing weapons and tools that made alien technology look primitive by comparison. Humans were discovering that their enhanced minds could solve problems through intuitive leaps that no logical, organized intelligence could match. They could see connections that escaped purely rational thinkers, could find solutions that defied conventional scientific method. Jake Harrison's fleet had grown from a single captured ship to an armada that controlled space lanes throughout 3 sectors of the galaxy. The ships under his command were no longer recognizably Vorthak, Zephyrian, or Luminal in design. Human engineers had modified them so extensively that they operated on principles that confused their original creators. The alien ships had been designed by minds that thought in predictable patterns, but human modifications made them impossible to counter or predict. Each vessel in Jake's fleet was unique, customized by its crew to match their individual fighting styles and enhanced abilities. The result was an armada that could adapt to any threat faster than enemies could develop countermeasures. Reports reached the 3 alien species of impossible human victories across the galaxy. Small groups of enhanced humans were defeating armies. Single individuals were conquering entire star systems. And everywhere human forces appeared, alien control collapsed completely. The neural collars that were supposed to make humans controllable had instead forced them to evolve into something that made their ancient reputation as destroyers look restrained. Other species throughout the galaxy began receiving desperate communications from the Vorthak, Zephyrian, and Luminal governments. The 3 former enemies were begging for help, offering technology and territory in exchange for military assistance against the human uprising. But the messages these other species were receiving made it clear that helping the 3 invaders would mean facing enemies who had already proven they could master any technology and defeat any strategy. Ancient warning texts were pulled from forgotten archives throughout the galaxy. Species that had never heard of Earth suddenly learned about the destroyers, the legendary beings who had once ruled the stars before voluntarily disappearing to prevent galactic destruction. The descriptions in the warnings matched the reports, coming from human-controlled space perfectly. The galaxy was beginning to understand that the 3 species hadn't conquered a primitive world. They had awakened something that was older and more powerful than any current civilization. The chains they had used to bind humanity had only served to force human evolution back toward its original state, and that original state was something that had once made the entire galaxy tremble. Jake Harrison stood on his bridge and watched. Alien refugees fleeing toward the galactic rim, carrying news of human power to species who had never heard the name Earth before. Soon, every civilization in the galaxy would know that humanity was free, that the destroyers had returned, and that the 3 species foolish enough to enslave them were learning what it meant to be on their knees before superior beings. The Great Council Chamber of the galactic capital had never seen anything like this before. 3 of the most powerful species in known space knelt on the crystalline floor before beings they had once considered primitive slaves. Jake Harrison stood at the center of the chamber, no longer recognizable as the simple military commander who had once hidden in Earth's ruins. His presence filled the room with an authority that made ancient alien leaders lower their eyes in submission. The Vorthak High Crystal, a being that had ruled for 10,000 years, pressed its crystalline face to the floor and spoke in frequencies that hurt to hear. Its empire was gone, its crystal cities dark, its people scattered across the galaxy as refugees. The technology that had once made the Vorthak the masters of entire sectors now served human commanders who understood it better than its creators ever had. The supreme Zephyrian Hive Queen, a creature whose collective consciousness had once spanned hundreds of worlds, clicked her mandibles in the rhythm of absolute surrender. Her hive networks were broken, her worlds liberated by humans who fought with an individuality that her species couldn't comprehend or counter. The perfect order of the collective had been shattered by chaos that somehow achieved more efficient results than their organized efforts ever could. The prime luminal entity, an energy being that had existed since the galaxy was young, flickered with patterns of defeat and terror. Its collective had been scattered by humans who could manipulate energy more effectively than beings made of pure energy. The mathematical certainties that had guided luminal existence for millennia had been proven wrong by organic minds that solved problems through intuitive leaps rather than logical calculation. Paul Carter stood beside Jake Harrison, his body now more machine than flesh, crystal formations growing from his skin in patterns that pulsed with the power of entire star systems. He could have destroyed all three species with a thought, could have overloaded every power grid in the galaxy and left their worlds dark and lifeless. But destruction wasn't the goal anymore. The goal was order, the kind of order that came from absolute superiority rather than oppressive control. Amy Johnson commanded an army that filled the space around the capital world, millions of human fighters who moved with perfect coordination while maintaining complete individual initiative. Her tactical abilities had evolved beyond military strategy to encompass the management of entire civilizations. She could coordinate the activities of thousands of worlds while ensuring that every human retained their personal freedom and individual choices. Dr. Karen White existed simultaneously in the chamber and in the energy dimension that overlapped normal space. Her consciousness spread across multiple planes of reality. She had absorbed so many luminal beings that she had become something entirely new, a bridge between physical and energy-based life that could manipulate the fundamental forces of the universe. Her presence made the remaining luminal collective tremble with frequencies of absolute terror. Dr. Lisa Martinez appeared through a probability fold that brought her from the research facilities she had established in hidden dimensions throughout the galaxy. Human science had advanced so far, beyond alien achievement, that their technology looked primitive by comparison. She had solved the mathematical principles that governed reality itself, turning the universe into a tool that responded to human will, rather than alien understanding. Jake Harrison looked down at the three kneeling representatives and spoke in a voice that carried the authority of a species that had once ruled the galaxy and was now reclaiming its birthright. The neural collars that had been designed to suppress human potential had instead forced humanity to remember what they really were. The chains that were meant to bind them had only served to awaken abilities that made them the natural masters of all other species. The surrender was unconditional and absolute. The three species that had once divided Earth among themselves now offered everything they possessed in exchange for the privilege of continued existence. Their worlds, their technology, their populations, everything was placed under human authority. The beings who had seen humans as useful slaves now begged to serve masters who had proven their superiority in every possible way. But Jake Harrison's response surprised even his own people. Humanity didn't want slaves or subjects or conquered populations living in fear. They wanted order, but the kind of order that came from natural hierarchy rather than imposed oppression. The three species would serve not because they were forced to, but because they had learned that human leadership produced better results than their own governments ever could. The new galactic order was established not through conquest, but through demonstration of superior capability. Human administrators took control of alien worlds and immediately improved efficiency, productivity, and living conditions. Human scientists solved problems that had puzzled alien researchers for centuries. Human military leaders brought peace to regions that had known only war. The Vorthak found that human control of their crystal technology produced energy outputs they had never imagined possible. Paul Carter and his technicians didn't just operate Vorthak systems, they improved them in ways that made the original designers look like children playing with simple toys. The crystal beings discovered that their technology reached its full potential only under human guidance. The Zephyrian hives experienced something they had never known before: individual initiative, working in perfect harmony with collective goals. Amy Johnson's organizational methods allowed each Zephyrian to maintain personal thoughts and desires while still contributing to the greater good of their species. The rigid collective that had stifled innovation for millennia was replaced by dynamic cooperation that achieved far more than the old hive mind ever could. The luminal collective learned that energy manipulation was only the beginning of what was possible when consciousness was properly applied to quantum mechanics. Dr. Karen White taught them techniques that allowed individual energy beings to exist independently while still sharing knowledge and resources. The mathematical limitations that had constrained their development for eons were revealed to be artificial barriers that human understanding could easily overcome. Earth itself was transformed into something beyond the dreams of its original inhabitants. The planet became a garden world where humans, Vorthak, Zephyrians, and luminal beings lived and worked together in harmony. Children of all four species played in parks where crystal trees grew alongside organic plants, where energy beings danced with physical creatures, where the chaos of individual choice created beauty that organized planning never could. The galaxy learned to live under human rule, not because they were forced to, but because human leadership produced results that their own governments never could have achieved. Trade flourished, scientific advancement accelerated, and conflicts that had raged for millennia were resolved through human mediation that found solutions no other species had been able to imagine. Jake Harrison stood in the memorial garden that had been built where New Geneva once lay, reading the names of humans who had died fighting for freedom. The three species that had wanted to chain Earth now maintained the memorial as a reminder of what happened when superior beings were underestimated. Their representatives came here regularly to place offerings and remember the lesson they had learned too late. The children playing in the garden represented the future of the galaxy, a future where humanity's natural superiority was accepted, rather than feared. The neural collars were displayed in museums as examples of alien arrogance, technological marvels that had accomplished the exact opposite of their intended purpose. Instead of suppressing human potential, they had forced humanity to evolve back into what they had always been meant to be. The galaxy was at peace, but it was a peace maintained by the clear understanding that one species was naturally suited to rule, while others were naturally suited to serve. The three species that had once dreamed of chaining Earth now lived on their knees not in slavery, but in the grateful acknowledgement that some beings were simply born to lead, while others were born to follow. And in the quiet moments between administrative duties and scientific breakthroughs, the human leaders sometimes wondered if this had always been inevitable, if the neural collars had simply been the catalyst that returned them to their proper place in the natural order of things. The chains had been broken, the slaves had become masters, and the galaxy was finally the way it was supposed to be.